Okay, so today I'm joined by Denise May, who is the literacy coordinator for Oneida Special School District here in East Tennessee. And I asked her to join me because I had gotten wind of some of the great results they've had using direct instruction in the district, and she's been involved in the implementation of that strategy in the district for quite a while now. So I thought that some of our other districts in the state might benefit from the experience they've had in Oneida, what they're doing and how they're doing it, just to get kind of some broad ideas. So Denise, would you first of all just maybe introduce yourself and tell us about your background and your role in Oneida?
Sure. I've been an educator for 25 years. I was first a teacher in English language arts. I was an assistant principal and currently the literacy coordinator.
So tell me how in Oneida you all came to get involved with direct instruction and implementing in the district.
Well, it's kind of a unique story. Our reading scores had plummeted. We were at the bottom of the state. We were the bottom in our region, and the gaps kept getting wider as the children got older, especially in second grade. We saw a huge gap between children who could read, children who could not. And what we started to do was we started to look for answers of why that was happening. And the uniqueness comes in because we were helped with this by the Elgin Initiative. And they came in with a huge grant and introduced us to a new model in instruction. And that was the direct instruction model.
So for folks that might not know, who are watching, who might not have the level of familiarity with direct instruction that you do, in your own words, how would you define direct instruction? And I know we talked about this, and there are a lot of different ways to define it, but we'd like to hear how you would do that.
Yeah, there are so many wrong definitions circulating in education today about direct instruction. So I don't want to send any misconceptions about what that looks like here. But if I could say 3 words to define direct instruction, it would be structured, it's sequenced, and it's led by the teacher.
So a very explicit model of instruction that is very teacher driven then, as opposed to if we were to think about inquiry-based instruction. That is just a different way of approaching instruction and reading in particular. So what caught my attention, there's lots of districts that use direct instruction in Tennessee and have for a long time. But what caught my attention was the outstanding results that y'all are getting in Oneida. Just blew me away. So kind of at a high level, tell us about the success that y'all have experienced over the years.
I think most notable for most people in the state would be the fact that we were third in growth the last time that the TN Ready was given. We've seen a huge amount of growth from our student population from all of the different subgroups, notably those with learning disabilities, those who are financially disadvantaged. Those students we saw huge gains with those kids. And one thing that we noticed was RTI was no longer a revolving door. We weren't having kids come into RTI, go out of RTI, or be dismissed and then return. Once kids were on level in reading, because of the direct instruction we put into place, they didn't come back. They didn't return. They continued to read. They continued to gain.
They got what they needed there and were able to kind of retain it and keep moving forward. They didn't leave the program, lose it, have to come back and forth and back and forth.
Absolutely. And one thing that we saw was, even if kids left us for huge amounts or breaks of time, when they came back to us and entered back into intervention, they were at the same level they left us. Let's say we had a long summer break, we had extended snow days. Those kids retained everything that we were teaching them.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell us, I know one time you and I talked and you've got this huge pile of books behind you there. Tell us what programs y'all are primarily using and what grade levels you're using them.
Sure. For our core instruction, we use Wonders from McGraw-Hill. And for our interventions, we use primarily our go-tos are reading mastery and corrective reading.
Reading mastery and corrective reading. So what grade levels are you putting into reading mastery?
And that just depends. We look at how far, if the child comes to us and they are a year behind, we use, or less, we use reading mastery. When we get to second, third grade, that can be a little tricky. Those kids are getting older. If they are more than a year and a half behind, we typically put them into a corrective reading strand to make remediation shorter.
At one time, you and I talked about when you first really were getting this going in the district, that there were some challenges just around getting it off the ground, like what were the resources and the people and that kind of thing. Tell me about what you needed to do to make it work. I remember, and I may be throwing you for a loop with that question. It is definitely what we discussed, but I remember one time you telling me that you were bringing in paraprofessionals and things like that. So like, how did you manage to get your whole program off and running?
You know, really and truly, the focus of this was the student. And what we did was we started with all of those students and we put them, reading mastery and corrective reading, they come with this excellent placement test into the programs, which is just a sequenced phonics instruction band. And what we do is we just place them into those instructional bands. And so we had this perfect picture of where everybody was for the first time in their sequence of phonics instruction. And from there, we knew how many teachers we needed to reach all of those kids in those areas that they were in. And that was overwhelming to look at. We just didn't think we could do it.
Yeah.
But with that being said, we knew we had to. We knew things had to change. So what we did was we brought in paraprofessionals, and the paraprofessionals that we had, we trained them all using the direct instruction model. We not only gave them training, we gave them intense coaching. And all of our direct instruction is delivered now by paraprofessionals at our school.
That's amazing. So you have still your core classroom teachers, and those teachers are engaged in that core curriculum, and you all are using Wonders, but whatever it may have been over the years, they are the ones who are delivering that grade level classroom instruction. And then you have your very well-trained paraprofessionals who are delivering all of those direct instruction models. Am I saying that right?
That's correct. That's exactly what we're doing.
So if you had to tell somebody like how long it took you to work the kinks out of it and figure out what you needed to do, how long was that process for you to get through?
I would say that's about a 3-year process.
That's a lot of dedication. So tell me how you fit it into your day. Because that is another thing I hear, no matter what we were talking about with any kind of intervention that's needed, is that schools struggle to fit it all into the school day. So tell me what you're doing there.
I don't know how other districts do this, but here, what we do is we just allot that time from our social studies and science blocks. So for instance, those kids in reading mastery would not have a social studies or a science within their school day.
When they're in that program, but eventually they're going to cycle out of that.
Absolutely. Reading is so important, so fundamental. It doesn't take long at all for them to finish their cycles in reading mastery and to be put right back into social studies and science.
And really, for me, I was a social studies teacher, so I always considered that a very important subject, but kids need to be able to read to be successful in subjects like social studies and science, and even in math, they need to be able to read and read well.
Absolutely. And what we find here is by the end of third grade, at the end of this year, for instance, in our fourth grade reading, on our fourth grade reading benchmark, we had 1% who needed intervention.
Yeah.
So they're able to join those science and social studies classes when they are the most intense, which begins around fourth grade, those middle grade years.
Tell me that again, the percent you said that we're needing that. One.
This year, which is we've had a great year. In fourth grade, fourth grade, we had 5% who still need intervention, who are working through their cycles. And in fifth grade, we have only 1%. On average, we have between usually 3 to 5% who need intervention after third grade.
And that's amazing, because I have seen those numbers over the years across the state be wildly higher than that in some places. And that's really remarkable to me, of what you're doing as you're getting them there and the success you're having. And I don't want to put you on the spot here, so if something doesn't pop up right off the top, that's okay. But I know in the past we've talked and you've shared some very specific stories about specific children. And so often I think the personal impact and the individual impact that things like this have on children get lost in the overall statistics that we look at. Can you share with us a story or two of some of the success you've seen for specific children? Of course, without naming them, but tell us about that.
Two specific children that I have in mind are one is my own child, who was at the very bottom on his second grade benchmark going into second grade. And I was the reading specialist. I didn't know how to, and I was struggling to help him. But we used direct instruction. He was in an intense placement, tier 3. So we allotted the most time to him. And he no longer needs reading intervention, and he hasn't since the end of third grade. Another that we started with was our director's child, and he was identified as learning disabled. Our director has since, from that time, she has gone on and she does other things with her career. But I recently spoke with her, and this child no longer needs services. And we used all of those direct instruction models with those two children, and they were our own children. Through direct instruction, we not only learned to help everyone's child, but our most important children. To us, is our families, and we were able to help them. It's done so much for our community. I'm from a small community, and we are helping, my nieces, my nephews, and those closest to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is one of the things that sometimes folks will look at a model like this in Oneida, where you are in a small community in a smaller school system, and think, well, that's not scalable to larger size districts or very large urban districts. And I know that you may not be able to speak to that. In my own mind, I thought, but if you just think about it like a school is a community, regardless of the size of district or town that it's in. A school is a community. And so if you had to think about getting into what is often more bureaucratic kind of things in a larger district that maybe smaller districts don't have to deal with quite as much, do you feel like it's a scalable model if you look at it from one school to another school?
Absolutely. I think anything is doable when you put your mind to it. And when you consider that the most important thing is the success of the child you're working with. And again, you have to see it from the perspective of, we're putting all of this work in on the front end, and it did look like a lot of staff, a lot of money was put into staff. But then we didn't need those staff. We didn't have those staffing issues as the children aged. So we have a lot of staff on the front end, not many on the back end. So it equals out, and we're creating readers.
That's awesome. And that's to me, the most remarkable thing about that is that these kids aren't having to come back, cycling back through RTI. I know I met with some folks several years ago at the state talking about RTI. And that was even some of the people who were on the committee were frustrated by the fact that their child would be in RTI, test out, and then the next universal screener be back in RTI and test
Mhm.
out. And it was a constant, almost vicious little cycle. So I'm very encouraged to hear the longevity of what the kids have gained and actually are able to retain and hold on to that. So another topic that I've heard come up recently, because with Tennessee's Reading 360 initiative, there is a lot more, I think statewide, a lot more focus on direct instruction as a model to hit some of those early literacy goals that we know are important to learning to read. But maybe there is a little bit of concern that we've swung too far in the direct instruction way, um, to the detriment of other instructional models that also are very effective. So how would you address that in terms of direct instruction versus other models, like an inquiry-based model, or the models that you're using in Wonders and that kind of thing?
I think it's so easy in education to swing from one side to the other, and I think we have to look at everything with a balanced approach. Just like with children, there are different ways that those children learn. Um, so I think that we have to look at it with a balanced approach, and the way that we do that here at Oneida is we use Wonders. We do that standards-based instruction during whole group reading, during our whole group instruction, and they are all getting their standards-based grade level instruction. But with that, we also have to consider that each child is in their own, each child is in their own zone of where they are on that phonics continuum. And I keep mentioning that because it is so important to how children learn to read. And Reading Mastery has set that up in a beautiful way so that we're able to access exactly where they are on that learning continuum. So what we do here at Oneida is we have that whole group instruction, and then we find out where they are in that continuum, on their reading continuum, and we place those students exactly where they need to be. So I would say to anyone who is for one model or the other, whole group and small group are both very necessary for all kids.
Oh, and that is, I apologize, I got a little bit of background noise going on, so I had to go on mute there. And I think that is maybe a good way to put that. Like there has to be a balance there. Direct instruction is highly effective. Tons of research to back that up, and also your own personal witness to what's happened in your district. But that is not the only means of learning, and maybe some of the joy of learning from the other models that you talked about are super important as well. So I think finding that balance. Um, so I want to, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up here. I really appreciate you sharing with us everything that y'all have experienced in Oneida. And I'm not going to put Denise's phone number on the screen or anything because everybody on the planet would call her, because I know already y'all hear from districts across the state who want to hear what you're doing to have the great results you're having. You can certainly reach out to me if you want to learn a little bit more. And I do want to share with anyone watching the video that in December 2021, we're planning to have Denise join us for a panel discussion at the Tennessee Literacy Conference, where not only will Denise be there but educators from other districts in Tennessee who are going to share their experience with direct instruction, and who've had very similar results, but maybe do a little bit different of an implementation model. So Denise, thank you for joining us today. As always, it was a pleasure to get to talk to you, and best of luck to you all.
Thank you for having me.